Day 998 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 720,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,640 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 12 tanks, 27 APBs, and 36 artillery. Then headed straight to the map and starting with Kursk, where Russia aims to regain control of the region by January 20, coinciding with Trump's inauguration. But it's not just that, as the Kremlin is reportedly now insisting that it won't negotiate until Kursk is liberated, viewing it as a crucial asset rather than a bargaining chip. So that's Russia, happy to use Ukrainian territory as a bargaining chip, but none of its own land, despite the fact that the Kremlin started a war that ironically led to both sides controlling territory of each other's. Now, if Putin cannot recover Kursk by Jan 20, despite his best efforts, many then will start to catch on that he has exhausted his military, and that alone should give Zelensky more bargaining chips. And it still blows my mind, the very fact that another country has taken military control of some Russian land on its populated western side of their country for over 3 months now. Which surely has Putin dying on the inside from embarrassment, given the myth of the unbeatable Russian army that he has propagated throughout his country for years now. Then to take a brief look at some Kursk snapshots, Ukrainian troops from the 129th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade actively repelled a Russian offensive in the territory. Then also with updates as Ukrainian tanks launched another offensive against Russian positions in the same region as per updates from the AFU's 17th Separate Mechanized Brigade. Then also, and always troubling for an offensive force, as we've seen how Ukrainian sappers continue to actively destroy Russian armored vehicles in the Kursk region by remotely planting mines from above, with the Ukrainian operators almost every expectation that the untrained crews of these Russian vehicles will somewhat predictably travel down the main arterials, with recon drones lying in wait, or really flying in wait, as some of these dropped and camouflaged anti-armor mines are equipped with an electronic magnetic influence fuse, which basically means it's activated upon detection of the change in the Earth's magnetic field caused by a passing vehicle, like a tank. Then headed down the map to Donetsk, where over the weekend, and in a significant strike, the Birds of Mayar team successfully destroyed a Russian Borisoglepsk 2 electronic warfare system in the Pokrovsk sector, using a heavy drone, likely the Vampire type. And though it doesn't look like much, the Borisoglepsk 2 EW system, mounted to an MTLB armored tracked carrier, costs a whopping $25 million per jamming station unit, and is typically used as part of a wider complex of about 8 or 9 vehicles worth about $200 million in total. Though safe to say the producer of these such systems had Russian contractors salivating at the mouth where that size of funding was sent to, and on the balance of probabilities siphoned off to Russian oligarch super yachts. But back to this event, as this particular instance marks a notable return to action against such systems after over a year at least. Plus, it's worth a mention here that the Achilles heel of electronic warfare that lies in actively influencing the electromagnetic spectrum is something that exposes it to detection and countermeasures, which can start to get tricky, very tricky and vulnerable in a hot war. Then headed across the map to the settlement of Tavria of the Zaporizhia region. Just off one of the main highways, a significant number of Russian troops were targeted, struck by multiple HIMARS attacks over the weekend, making for quite the accumulation of Russian troops surprisingly close to the front lines. Just a mere 16 kilometers or 10 miles away. It's quite the tactical negligence on the part of Russian commanding officers, where this gross operational incompetence is in effect tantamount to some fairly careless and thereby disgusting treatment towards their own forces. Then on the map, and not too far from here, traveling southeast, as Ukrainian partisans from the Atesh group sabotaged a crucial railway in the eastern Tokmak district, reportedly damaging a relay box of the railway network, although I'd say it looks a bit more than damaged there. And done so all as part of continued resistance efforts in disrupting Russia's military logistics. But many also find it to be a very clear sign of how Ukrainians feel very much occupied by invaders, as these partisans risk their lives to keep up these valiant efforts for the armed forces of Ukraine. Then headed central north on the map because following videos of Russian troops planting their flag by the border and into Ukraine's Chernihiv Oblast, where Ukraine's State Border Guard Service swiftly responded by releasing an updated drone footage piece that showed the destroyed flag on yesterday, Saturday, November 16. The Border Service reported that intelligence reveals the Russian reconnaissance group retreated before the flag's destruction, with dismissing the incident as a failed psychological tactic with no real military significance. So apart from the psychological merit, it's quite the propaganda ploy as well. I mean, does Russia really want to open another front in this war? Probably not. And yet, in some odd respects, Ukraine's army would probably welcome it. After all, Ukraine spent the entire SMO invasion building up their border forces with skilled brigades, especially in the north, where Chernihiv is concerned, and the same can certainly be said for Sumy. Where on the flip side of things, Russia's lacking token border forces along their northern border to Ukraine, whereas on the flip side, Russia's lacking token border forces along the southern border of theirs leading into Ukraine, failed to have the same build-up, leading their token border forces to become overrun by the AFU in Suja and beyond. We all know how that turned out. Then to take a brief look around the map today, so a Russian T-90M main battle tank, codename Breakthrough, faced a challenging situation as it was trying to break through an anti-tank ditch and overturned on the battlefield. A couple of quadcopters were called in to finish it off. Then also in the east, and it's tanks galore, as these two Russian tanks, a T-80BV and a T-80BVM, seem destroyed, as if there wasn't a care in the world for Ukrainian defenders. Then also, over the weekend, a Ukrainian heavy night bomber drone successfully destroyed another Russian Buk M1 air defense system, also viewable from quite some distance away, and potentially making for the 999th air defense system component destroyed in this war, where it comes to Russian hardware losses. Though, certainly this was more than just a component in its own right, with the Buk M1 capable acting as an all-in-one unit, being that it's equipped with its own radar and command systems to detect, track, and engage targets without relying on external support. Then headed across to some news for today, and starting out with a little bit of drama, I would say, in the Russian military landscape, as a large-scale leadership purge has been underway within Russia's 3rd Guard Combined Arms Army, with reports indicating that the entire command staff has been fired, and several brigade commanders, including those from the 6th, 7th, and 123rd Brigades, who have been arrested or are in hiding. Now, of note about this event is that this upheaval follows revelations that the commanders falsified reports about territorial gains in the Donetsk region, prioritizing misleading progress over the safety of their soldiers, where for several months they reported the capture of multiple locations which was entirely false. And the truth came to light only when the senior officers arrived to inspect Bilorivka. And I'll quickly show you that on the map, because as per their understanding, the senior officers, based on what they read on the reports, Bilorivka was supposed to be well into the rear, something that was meticulously documented on paper. So following these revelations, Russian soldiers themselves lamented, here's a statement, quote, "The commanders didn't care about the fate of their soldiers, their main goal wasn't to defeat the enemy but to report progress," with their own air quotes with the word progress. And as far as the map goes, we've pieced a lot of examples together where the Russian army has been making all sorts of false claims as it relates to captured settlements, towns, villages, you name it. Now, as far as these falsified Russian reports go for this latest example, the Russian army was claiming the liberation of settlements far beyond Bilorivka. But of course, it's not just isolated to this one location on the map, meaning that it's likely a drop in the bucket for what else is on the Russian books as meticulously documented as Russian-controlled. Russia could have taken Pokrovsk, and we wouldn't even know it. Then headed across to some other news, a bit of an economy segment mixed with a military mobilization blunder, because updates on the bonus payments for Russian voluntary contract deployment to Ukraine has now ramped up once again in key regions including Rostov, seeing an increase to 2.3 million rubles, while Novosibirsk rises to 1.5 million rubles. The average payment across the top 10 regions now stands at 2.435 million rubles, about 2.5 million rubles, and reflecting a steady climb. And the chart topper, Nizhny Novgorod at 3.2 million rubles. But to put all of these rubles into further context, as I don't expect you to be pulling out the rubles when you go to your local convenience store, so contextually speaking, these sign-up bonus payments are worth more than the annual salary of your typical mobilized Russian soldier. But there's a catch. There's always a catch, because many who get these sign-up bonus payments don't end up getting paid any salary at all once they make it into the SMO. Word then gets out about this failure to pay, this trickery, inevitably leading to the need for further bonus increases, vicious cycle. But more importantly, it's all very indicative of a supply and demand issue when it comes to willing participants of the SMO. Then very briefly headed to some Russian economy news, with fresh reports of Russia's real estate market facing a significant crisis as the third largest property developer, PIK Group, collapses following the downfall of the largest developer, Samolet Group, just a week prior. And with over 53 million square meters of new apartments unsold and October sales plummeting by up to 82% in some regions, as previously I've reported on, it would quite shockingly appear a major correction looms on the horizon. Then to fire off some Russian military mobilization blunder segment pieces, with the first that's sure to backfire over time, as Putin reduced compensation for wounded servicemen by cutting promised payouts from 3 million rubles to a significantly lower amount of about 1/3 of that payment, in a move aimed at scaling back the financial incentives initially introduced to bolster recruitment without full mobilization. Also affected are moderately wounded Russian soldier payments and minor injury payments, as these reductions highlight the Kremlin's struggle to manage mounting war-related expenses, including pensions and benefits, while attempting to stabilize an increasingly unstable economic situation. And it probably goes without saying, but quite the shameless act for Putin in reducing the payments to the wounded servicemen, given this is, after all, Putin's war. Then to another quick blunder, so Russian forces pause their looting and invading to voice complaints about having only one Russian to share among themselves. The tensions seem to rise as they grapple with the dwindling supplies amid the harsh conditions that they face. An army marches on its stomach. I believe it was Napoleon that said that. So that has to be it for today, guys, as I jump back behind the scenes now for some software tweaking, ultimately designed in shooting for regular updates and a slight bump here and there on production values. So thanks again for watching, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!